There's a question before us, before we even start any particular subject matter. And the question is, can anger and spirituality, if you like, or spiritual practice coexist? And the answer is, of course, theoretically anything can coexist, but is it useful? Is anger in any way useful? Now you recall that Ramakrishna himself said, well, if we are to be angry, let's be angry at God. You haven't revealed yourself, please reveal yourself. That kind of anger should be there. But if it's anger in a reactive sense, it's definitely not a virtue. And Krishna tells us it is one of the 3 gates of hell. In other words, it brings us down. It doesn't elevate the mind. It's very obvious that it doesn't. So by the time a wave starts as a reaction and comes to a crescendo, and we identify it as, I am angry, Swami Vivekananda in his Raja Yoga was saying, now I've identified with the wave. And I am not the wave. I am the observer of a wave. I register myself as an observer when the wave of anger started. I can see it have its day, have its role on the stage, if you will. And then I can see it go away, drift away, like any wave does. Every wave begins with a beginning, and we can see it come up to a peak, and then it has a demise. That's the nature of a wave. And we categorize waves according to length, according to length between, one peak of a wave and another, or a hollow and another. Yeah, wave length is there. And how fast it goes, a frequency, and so on. We register that. So we have to be careful, because everything that surfaces as a wave in the mental field will have its memory, its deposit. It'll be registered in the library of the unconscious and will not do us any good. And often some forms of modern psychology say, oh, it's good. If you're angry, angry is an energy, that much we agree on. So you need to get it out of your system. You need to go, as long as you're not harming anybody, you have to go and dig a hole or something, or punch a pillow, or do something physical and get it all out. That's good. That's how you'll feel much better afterwards. But what you've done is that there is a harm in making the film of the person, and that is you are harming yourself. You may not be harming another, but you're harming yourself. Then the question arises, is there any difference between what you think and the overall contribution toward thought in the world as we know it? And we would argue, yes, every thought has its repercussions if you think that there is a holistic view of what is called mind. Suppose saying that everything can be reduced down to its unitary essential, that is, there's only one energy, there's only one mind, there's only one overall matter, there's only one verse called the universe. Supposing you come to this holistic conclusion, and Vedanta comes to this conclusion, then of course, whatever thing you do here, whatever tremor or vibration you make here, has its effect everywhere. Just as in a finite pond, you dabble some water here, create a small wave, and you'll feel it everywhere. And you must have noticed sitting on a beach, or beside a lake, and a speedboat comes, and the waves come to you on the shore. So if you take that view that there's only one thing, then you'll come to that conclusion. It's not only harmful for your own psyche, your own behavioral construction, but it is also harmful overall. We have a kind of phrase for that these days, the butterfly effect, that even the wings of a butterfly has an overall effect elsewhere, has a ripple effect elsewhere. How else can it be? There's only one earth that we're dealing with. When we talk about climate change, we can't just talk about Africa or Australia or something like that, or Ireland. We have to talk about the overall thing. That what we call weather is an accumulation of things due to the movement of the earth, that arrangement, and the fact that gravity is there, the fact that wind currents are there, air currents are there, an atmosphere is there, and even a smaller drama that the clouds are there taken up from the oceans, and all of that is a wonderful arrangement that keeps our ecological earth spinning and in a relative harmony. Never mind about damaging it, that we are quite good at doing, it seems. So there is one thing that we call nature, really. And when you deal with Yoga, Sankhya philosophies, they make this distinction between what they call Purusha and Prakriti. So what is nature? Nature provides a framework of time and space and a causal relationship. And when we get angry about something, it is in the realm of nature. We are reacting to a scene in front of us. And the components necessary for a reaction would be, I have to think of myself not as, in a holistic context, I have to think of myself as an individual. And something is being aimed at me, and now I have to react. Now, this works for self-preservation in many species, biological species worldwide. But is man just a mere biological component of nature? Is it man's nature to be reactive and angry? And if it's your nature, then there's no way of dealing with it. That's it. You can't change it. But if it's not your essential true nature, then you can change it. And all of us are essentially thinkers. And thoughts act more or less like waves. And we usually direct these waves to get some desirable object or purpose, and when that's thwarted, according to our psychology, Eastern psychology, when it's thwarted, anger arises. So when we analyze what is anger, it's a frustration based on an egoistic desire that we haven't got what we really wanted. Anyway, all these waves, these thought waves, they duly condense our intentions. That's an important point to understand. And they condense, as it were, as appropriate scenes or social setup in front of us. And so it's logically obvious. There's no point in reacting negatively to it if we ourselves created it. But we have to really understand we ourselves ordered whatever is in front of us, and we have no business to complain. And it will never be perfect. It'll all be full of opportunities for getting more. So two sections in any scenario would arise. One is the perceived part, and the other is the perceiving complex, what we call a body-mind instrumentation. And the perceiver finds themselves, himself or herself, equipped with a wonderful apparatus. We can divide this apparatus into two things. We can say the outside of it is the physical body, and that's subject, of course, to birth and growth and old age and death and decay and so on. It's a changing thing. And of course, it has 5 sense organs, 5 organs of information, and 5 organs of action. And ultimately, there's a kind of mind, a registration office that receives all these things and makes an appropriate reaction. And anger is one of those reactions. So the inner side of this, the outer side is the body, but the inner side of this would be the mind and the ego. And so it's important when we understand what is nature to see that it is made from 5 objects, 5 organs of registration, 5 organs of reaction, mind and ego. And then, of course, behind all this, the 5 senses, sense objects, I should say, what is in front of us, they're classified as, let's say, the sun and water and air and everything else in our scenario is seemingly split up and divided. But these are 5 objects when you condense them all, and we have to understand these gross objects are really compounded forms of the subtle rudimentary elements. We call this tanmatras. Now, almost every talk I give, I mention these tanmatras, almost every talk. because it's very, very important to understand where these objects are arising from and to have a view that these are subtle waves invisible to us. And so the outer world can be looked upon as having 16 perishable forms, 5 objects, 5 sense organs, 5 organs of reaction, and the mind. And that provides us with 16 categories, if you will. And the Sankhyas have nicely done this for us. We accept it. Every school of thought will accept it. The Vedanta will accept it. And whether you are a dualist or a non-dualist or whatever it is, everybody accepts this way of thinking about nature in terms of categories. So the mind is the instrument that receives and helps to coordinate everything, the experiences, and we have to also add something else. These are experiences of our waking state. Now I was invited yesterday evening, because I was in that area, of a long-standing devotee, and the husband was being introduced really to the Vedanta, and he's trying to grasp something. And when we look at things with a view to getting a solution to a problem, we have to learn to be quick on our feet. We have to learn to shift between various positions that are suitable at the time. But in order to do this, we probably have to drop all our preconceived ideas. A good starting point: drop all your preconceived ideas. The great rishis of the Upanishads would have taken all their preconceived ideas and they would have put them to one side, put them on hold, as it were, while they made a thorough investigation. But in order to investigate any subject properly, we have to understand that certain questions have to be asked afresh. If we want to make any progress on a spiritual path, we have to, until we have caught a vision of the highest, the most supreme principle, we can call it God if we like, understanding that some people will not really readily accept the word because of preconceived ideas. So we have to maybe use some other terminology for it. The Upanishads will use the term Brahman. They'll also use the term Atman or Purusha. And the reason why they would shift is because I feel I'm an individual. And when I discover the essence of my own being, I also have to bear in mind that if I take a holistic approach, I'll have discovered this essential thing, this substantial thing, unchanging thing, that has no union in it, that has no parts in it, that has no time or space in it. And I have to take that thing and I have to see that I cannot have multiple versions of it. It is one thing and that's it. So some questions should be there. And we cannot make any spiritual progress until really we have caught some kind of vision of this supreme entity, but let's call it God for the time being. And so in using the very term, we have to strip away many preconceived ideas. And from that arises some questions, such as, what is our relationship to such a thing, such a God? And what is God's function in my life? Those kinds of questions. And it cannot be a vicarious experience. It must be an individual experience. It must be approached in a completely relaxed attitude, with a kind of let go, with no expectations about it, a calmness. I mentioned about the peace prayer before we start the recording, that we settle the mind in order to make it open before our study. And so we must be unwilling to accept any authority other than our own interior revelation if we are to make any progress in spiritual life. So we can ask ourselves questions about this subject. which will lead into a kind of meditation on the subject, such as what is the Supreme Being, what is the Atman, or what is God, and what does that mean to me? What is the place and function of this in my life? And now these were questions that were in many ways asked last night by somebody who is learning at grassroots level and trying to divest themselves of previous notions about the subject, which immediately eliminates many questions, such as, do you pray? If the answer is yes, what do you pray for? There's an assumption that prayer is a petition process. I have to ask for this or that, making God a kind of storekeeper, a kind of a provision storehouse, and doesn't really know what I need. It's not that kind of God that we pray to. And so, what is prayer? Prayer really will be very useful, very helpful, if we understand, have a kind of imitation conversation with God and say, okay, let me now stop talking, let me start listening. And on the other side, God is saying, my child, as long as you're talking, I can't talk. So now please listen. So therefore, what is prayer? Prayer is getting to a position of listening where these questions are answered from the interior, not the exterior. Nothing to do with theology, nothing to do with intellectual positions, but all to do with stilling our mind and accessing that reality and feeling it. So, how many people have ever had a God experience? That is a question. How many have felt the flow of the Spirit in their minds? How many have felt this flow in their souls or in their bodies? Well, the answer, of course, is very small numbers. Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, gives us almost like a numerical statistic, but it amounts to very few. Why very few? Because we're caught in a non-holistic individual situation where we think that the world is a struggle, we have to react to it, and anger arises, of course. Thwarted desire would come. So the number is very small, and only a few hundred, or at most, maybe a few thousands in a generation. And yet, what that essential being is, what that essential, substantial entity is, that is undissolved or undissolvable, that is undivided and unchanging and infinite, is a constant presence, not to be accessed in the future, but available to us right now. That we have to be convinced about, that we have to feel. And so, this possibility to access this is available to every man, to every woman, to every child. But there is a requirement: entire love and devotion. This Christian concept that goes back to Deuteronomy comes out in a conversation with Jesus. What should we do? What is the greatest commandment? And he goes back to the Jewish texts and says, you shall love your Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. And of course, there are many different commandments in this Torah, but that covers everything. And in devotional life, just that much. In devotional life, where we seek a relationship, this is true. And it's expressed in different ways. So Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita uses the phrase in a number of occasions, fix your mind, means fix your attention on me. Fix your attention on that Supreme. And so this has to be thought about, it has to be reflected on, It's worth meditating on. So we must be able to love that entity supremely with our whole heart, with our whole mind, our whole soul, our whole being. So much that our only prayer then becomes not a petitional prayer, but let me feel you. Let me feel your fill up, you filling me up. Let me feel this filling in my soul, in my heart, in my mind, in my being, in my very body, in my whole psychophysical. And then, of course, when we speak of this entity from an intellectual point of view, we talk about it really as the impersonal intelligence, mind, principle. But that being is personal too. In all the conversations with the 19th century mystic Ramakrishna Paramahansa, it is always, do you believe in God with form or without form? That question is there, and a surprising question to many, including the author of the Gospel of Ramakrishna, that came out as Kathamrita. And he's surprised by the question, because he's accustomed to thinking, well, it must be either this or that. You can't have form and formlessness. How is it possible? But of course it's true. And if we take a holistic approach, it has to be true, because the final conclusion of Vedanta is Jesus' statement, I and the Father are one. Initially, I would say there's a Father outside my range of experience. And I put that somewhere. And I use the analogy, and I've used it before, and I can use it now again. It's like I'm identifying myself egoistically with a wave in an ocean, suspecting there is a deep, unfathomable ocean beneath me or away from me somewhere, but I have no understanding of it, no contact with it. And so therefore I'm a struggling wave, either for or against other competing waves. And I live my life, and I understand waves come and go. Birth, life, and death is there with every wave. I see it with every other wave. But my life as a wave doesn't seem to end. And so at the moment, I'm happy just with being this little wave, thinking that other waves are either friends or hostiles. Then I can come to another conclusion. As I relate to these waves, and somebody has told me, by the way, there's an ocean. But that's far remote from me. It's outside my circle of understanding, because what we're looking for is beyond the range of the mind. The mind will not catch it. Words will not catch it. Speech will not catch it. And so I may suspect, well, wait, all these waves seem to have a similar DNA to me. There seems to be a similarity. We seem to have some kind of common origin. And we seem to be part of a whole thing going on, until ultimately we come to this realization, when waves are calmer, oh, I see, I am the ocean. When I relax, when my little wave relaxes into the depth, then this becomes a reality for me. I am the ocean. And as the ocean, I can be a wave if I like, but I'll never make the mistake that I am only a wave. So the relationship between an individual and this entity, which we might call God, is closer than his relationship with his own mother. And it's like reaching out and feeling a presence, always there, always gentle, always reassuring in its very quietude, in its quietness. And it is when we find it, we find a sense of joy and peace and warmth. We don't have to ask for it. It's immediately accessible. And the moment we have had this experience, which we could label divine experience, that gentleness is immediately there. That peace is immediately there. That warmth is immediately there. And with it comes a love toward everything. Love your neighbor as yourself. And the golden rule, do unto others as they would have done unto you. But what's the logic behind it? Is justice, social convenience? Or is it the fact that when we discover this fundamental thing of let us say, this infinite being, love itself, then we become loving toward others. And we see this essence everything, in everything, through everything, as everything, beyond everything. In this world, a sense of companionship and joy in one another at the human level. So you see, the normal concept of God is that it is separate from us, just as the wave thinks. So there's a distant thing. I heard about it. I read a book, and somebody gave me a preaching teaching that says there's a God, But this is so remote from us that we don't really relate to such a thing immediately. And we go from that stage of separateness, this sense of being apart from us, who has within himself all good, within itself. We can use any gender because it's all inadequate. It's our human way of understanding things in an anthropomorphic way. And so we find this within ourselves. We find it is all good, and it is not withholding anything from us. In fact, we are doing the withholding. So usually in praying to God, a starting position is for the purpose of seeking or getting something from this God, as if God is a supply house, storehouse for health or opportunity or companionship or whatever our desire would be. And so most of us believe that God possesses the good, or this good, or some good, no doubt. That's what's behind the petition or prayer. But for some inexplicable reason, this God is withholding everything from us. And so we pray to God to bestow some of it upon us. And sometimes if our prayers are not answered quickly enough, of course, we make a bargaining process. In every religion we find it. See, if you cook some paisam every day and offer it to Ganesh or something like that, and repeat his mantra for 40 days every day at certain hours of the day, then you'll get what you want. See, as if this being is a supply energy. And I know that Roman Catholics, I'll do there's a special name for it that eludes me at the moment, but anyway, I'll do so many Hail Marys, Our Fathers, and so on and so forth, and just to get what I want. A kind of bargaining process. If I do this, then this can happen. Now, sometimes it's quite useful in a sense. So I think Shankaracharya's birth, the mother made a kind of bargaining in that way. And that works, no doubt, but it doesn't really help us in revealing this essential thing. And I suppose in a vain effort to reconcile a supposedly loving God with a God who turns a deaf ear to all our supplications and beggings, if you will, we often censure ourselves and suffer from guilt, believing that some evil act of omission or commission is the reason that God is withholding things from us. And the same thing happens if you believe in this principle of karma. Did I do a good action or a bad action, and is that why I'm suffering? Well, these are all ridiculous questions in a way, because they all result in mental and physical difficulties. They're resulting in guilt and guilt complexes, and countless people of all flavors and religions who live in a state of gnawing self-condemnation and undeservability is what I like to call it. Thinking that we are being punished by a vengeful God. And that means our type of God is the kind of God that atheists today pick up and say, no, this kind of God will be horrendous. This kind of God will be a contemptible being, because they're making this God an object. And so it's not misfortune, as we like to classify it, is not because we violated anything. It's not because, except for one thing, and that is that it is not that God is a vindictive God, withholding things. He's a giving God. And when we see what is being given, when we register it, then thankfulness emerges. So all this devotional religion tells us God is love, not has love, but is love. Neither withholds nor punishes. No love is withheld, no punishment is given. If God waited for us to be good or deserving, if he waited for us to find the right words with which to placate him, if he waited for us to use some form of meditation or method of treatment or something like that, some correctional thing, then we would say these blessings would be seemingly withheld forever. That would be a cruel and capricious God, the kind of God that is portrayed and caricatured by modern atheistic people in modern atheistic movement that think that God must be an object. It can never be an object. It's the eternal subject. So, what is this indissoluble union we are talking about? It is here, it is now, it is always there, and it is not something that simply comes and goes. It is not something that is able to dissolve, and we cannot test out the objectivity of God by putting God in a test tube. See, is God alkaline or acid? Not that kind of thing. It's not the object of our scrutiny. It is the eternal subject which is here, which is now. So when we understand the structure of nature itself, and we see that there is an all-embracing cosmic principle there, and this all-embracing cosmic principle, or the personal God, is called by many names in the Vedanta. It is called Great Soul, it's called Mahan Atma, or simply Mahat. It's the firstborn out of the infinite potentialities of Mother Nature. And the Upanishads call him Hiranyagarbha, the kind of golden womb, the creative aspect of everything. In mythology, in Hindu mythology, is characterized as Brahma, the four-faced creator, seated on a lotus. And his manifesting power is what is called Vak, or Vani, or Saraswati, the word. And we find this concept coming through in Neoplatonism. Plotinus is using it, and it comes through in Christianity also, taking that up as well. So we can be treated, if we add up all these categories in the Sankhya system of categorization, that there are generally a sense of individuality, 17, number 17, that there is these five subtle energies, subtle forces, that, so 16, that's 20, 21, 22 categories. The 23rd category will be this personal God, this cosmic mind, whose characteristic is love. And the love comes out in a creative impulse, a creativity, a subtle wave of such magnitude that it has a creative capacity, and the whole of our nature is really a combination of these subtle graces, these subtle waves, these subtle glories that are coming from this cosmic mind. So this can be treated in terms of categories, and God's nature then becomes, we can say, the 24th part of the category, and God's nature then, and then we can choose to regard what we might see as an individual soul, individual spirit, what we can call technically jiva. We can think of it as a separate unit, it's okay, seeking freedom from nature, that's one aspect. And in that case, the jiva becomes the 25th, we can put it there, because of attachment to the body and ego of the waking state, we acknowledge, okay, there seems to be a separateness. We have to put this word seems to be inside, because our final conclusion is I and the Father are one. There is only this one, this indissoluble union. And of course, if we think that we are separate, this spirit finds itself to be one among a multitude of similar beings, all tied to mortal frames. But behind that nature that has to be understood and transcending everything is this indwelling, indissoluble union, which we call Purusha, this eternal self. And this eternal self is none other than that being that we call God. Because it's infinite, it's abiding in the hearts of everyone. And for the sake of counting, we can add it to our counting. Because that being, Purusha, Brahman, Atman, that one being from which everything else is coming, stands as the 26th. In him, everything is strung together, the Bhagavad Gita tells us, as a cluster of gems on a string. And when Lord Krishna, by the way, talks in the Bhagavad Gita, he thinks and acts as the Supreme Purusha. He's not thinking and acting as an individual, as a teacher of Arjuna. This is a great mistake that is made. So the great waves that come along, Jesus, Krishna, Buddha, and so on, when they say I and make it an exclusivist statement, they're not talking about a historical I. They're not talking about a psychophysical I. They're not talking about an individual soul that applies to that. They're talking about this infinite Supreme Purusha. They're standing there. Now in meditation, we can also stand there, by the way, and beam from there and see what things look like. And as I say many times, it's useful to sit where God sits on his royal throne and see how things look. This is the final solution to any so-called difficulty in our local experience. When something comes into our scene and we forget we ourselves created it, then this final solution for us is to withdraw, as it were, to that stable place where nothing moves. There's no divisions within it. And that then becomes an experience for us as absolute love, absolute joy, absolute peace. So, of course, the majority of us feel and act from the position of the devotee. You can say the 25th thing, the jiva. But, and of course, many philosophical quarrels will arise trying to answer the questions, are the jiva and the Supreme absolutely separate? Or are they related as a part of the whole? Or are they really identical, though viewed through the separate or through the sense organs of the waking state, they appear to be separate. And we have to put that qualification in through the waking state. It's not only the only state of consciousness that we have. So far we have some tools, an understanding of nature, resolving it back to a cosmic mind where it is distributing all these wonderful subtle waves. And it is all the one thing. The only separation is whether we think that we are a separate jiva, a separate wave, or whether we think we are connected, a kind of spark of the divine, or whether we think, no, we are the ocean. And that supreme position solves all the problems. It's a multi-purpose tool that can be applied. But we can shift our position to any one of these three positions. We don't have to stick on the one. So we have to say that wholehearted, non-demanding love from this 25th principle called jiva or soul makes grace flow from the 26th principle called Purusha and frees us from all our ignorance. What do we mean by ignorance? So grace frees us from ignorance. What is this ignorance? That we are separate individuals. In the wave analogy, I am the wave, and I will stick on to my wave nature and combat any other waves and create wars and difficulties in this. In other words, I am this egocentric entity, and when I drop that when I become completely selfless, then the sense of separation goes. And in this ignorance that causes a sense of separation and raises a crop, if I hang on to this sense of separation, the result of it will be that doubt and fear comes. Doubt and fear and anxiety, stress, all of this comes. Oh, I'm stressed. Let me go and speak to somebody. Well, that may be of some use, but it's only a temporary thing. We have to get down to the root. And the root is, I feel separate. This is our position. As soon as I understand, no, there's no separation, things change. So when the Lord Krishna, for example, will state that he himself, by a part of himself, a part of the jiva, this is the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, using a term that any kind of novice or beginner will use, has become the jiva in the world of living beings. And from there, draws the five senses and the mind as the sixth is the quotation, abiding in subtle form in nature. And I think many of us, many people fail to grasp the full significance of that statement. Some may intellectually appreciate it, but each seeker will need great mental purity to make this truth enter into this habit level. We must cultivate this sense of purity in mind, the highest possible values, all these wonderful moral, ethical, pure qualities which have their characteristic of no sense of self involved in it too, at all. And we have to do it without allowing despondency to enter the mind. Oh, I'm not doing good enough. I missed my meditation. I didn't do enough japa and so on and so forth. I feel extremely guilty because I didn't do it. Then my life is like this. We have to drop all of that. And we have to open ourselves up with a view to polishing the mind, getting great purity. And we do that by understanding properly that this being is right here and right now, imminently now, not something to get in the future. We must be resolved. We can't be daunted by delays which come from ignorance, by obstacles. Seeking the divine grace doesn't constitute begging. May I get this, may I get that? And all these categories I've mentioned, 26 of them, they don't stand for divisions in the divine. Let's not make that mistake. These are actually not divisions at all. These are variations. Because actually, the Supreme is really indescribable and beyond the range of words and concepts. And yet realization for all of us, man, woman, child, is possible. And when it comes, its joy removes doubt and fear. So the categories that I've just mentioned are just kind of convenient rungs, going back like a ladder supplied by scriptures. They're meant to enable us to raise ourselves up from where we stand at any time, at any place, wherever we are, whatever our spiritual status is, to attain mental purity that is needed for the revelation of that God from within. And that's how we started. We started today, that is required. Some kind of vision of God is required, some kind of internal revelation, answering the question, what is God? And all these manifestations up to this Brahma or cosmic mind, they evolve from their base. So that nature, the 24th category in the series of categories, is that being. And in the case of a person, there's the experience of day, night, the experience of waking, experience of dream, deep sleep. So also in an alternating cosmos as a whole, we see the same drama being played out. A period of activity, we call this Brahma's day. Now all this we can see as elaborated well in the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita will be to do with this indissoluble union that is called Aksharam, this imperishable Brahman. And the first stanzas of this, 1 to 8, will tell us about worshipping that entity with a form. But then some questions arise, on Wednesdays, on Sundays, we have an opportunity. Please ask a question. Well, if you're stuck for a question, it means that it looks like you have it all. No need to ask a question anyway in the first place. But in this chapter, these questions are being asked. So let's examine what they are. So one is, Kim tad Brahma, Kim Adhyatman. What is that Brahman? What is that Adhyatma? What is karma? What is said to be Adibhuta? What is said to be Adideva? And we've already answered these questions, but let's elaborate and find out what these terms mean. But it doesn't go on, it doesn't stop there. More questions come. Who and how is Adiyatnya here in this body? And how at the time of death are you to be known by the self-controlled? And the answer comes very directly, because the Lord says, Sri Bhagavan Vacha, Aksharam Brahma Paramam Swabho Dhyatman Uchyate. The imperishable, the supreme, is Brahman, this absolute. Dwelling doesn't go on there. It's not something remote, not something outside our scope. Dwelling where? In each body. And it's called the individual soul, Adhyatma, and the sacred offerings which causes the origin and development of all beings is called action or karma. So what is karma? Karma is all these categories that have come from one single creative movement. And we can say that there's a supreme action, karma, and it tells us the source of all these forms of separateness comes from this one source. And we have to, if we want to make any progress, we have to go and recognize it. So Adibhutam, what is that? Perishable entities are called Adibhuta. Bhuta means it literally is a ghost, or anyway, it can be translated like that, but it's an element. So perishable entities, they're all called these kind of elements. And the cosmic being, the Purusha, is this supreme deity, Adidevata, in other words, God. And then, of course, anybody, any great wave that comes, any word that becomes flesh and dwells amongst us in order to reform our situation and help us along at our human level, we call it our avatara, somebody that descends. Or we can think of it as a giant wave that comes to impact us and leave its mark for thousands of years so that we can be guided toward our own realization. Well, that is called adiyatnya because it's a kind of sacrifice, sacrificing the pristine absolute. And here in that body, that is him. So Krishna is saying, that is me. And moreover, what is the use of it? Whoever at the time of death gives up the body and departs, remembering me alone, that is, remembering this personal deity alone, attains my being. There's no doubt about this. He says there's absolutely no doubt about this. Ya prayati sa bhadabhavam yati nastya astra atra samsaya. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And yam yam vapi smaram bhavam, whatever being a person thinks of at the last moment when he leaves the body, that alone does he attain, being ever absorbed in the thought thereof. In other words, every moment is the last moment. When we say the last moment, we forget that every moment is the last moment. Every second is the last moment. All the other things have gone. And if we get into the habit of this fixing the mind on the Lord, then quite naturally, at that last moment, that is automatically what we'll be thinking of. So therefore, that's the conclusion. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mam anusmara yudya cha. Therefore, at all times, think of me and fight. Fight means do your duty and be observant, be ever playing this game of refining and purifying the mind. With the mind and intellect devoted to me, all my thoughts, all my feelings, all steered toward this Supreme Being. And the original question was about anger. So yes, anger is an energy, and as energy, it can be transformed into anything. It can be transformed into love. It can be transformed into thankfulness. And so with the mind not wandering after anything else, made steadfast by the method of abhyasa yoga, constant practice, and meditating on the Supreme Resplendent Lord, you reach Him. And then what is the destiny at the end? Well, there's a great description. And it goes on about how the spiritual practitioner, let's call it yogi, relinquishes the body. Yogi, the one who attempts in their words, their thoughts, and their deeds in concentration, concentrated effort. And you can discover what happens at that point, because subjects are dealt with. That is how the yogi can relinquish their body, and what is the method. And we can see amongst great spiritual saints and so on how they do that. And don't think that you're not one of them. Possibility is there. So there's a beautiful description, closing all the gates of the body, confining the mind within the heart, and drawing the prana, the energy, into the head. So engaged in the practice of concentration, uttering the one syllable Om, Brahman thinking of me as he leaves the body, that person so departs, attains the supreme goal. And if we study a description of how Swami Vivekananda leaves the body, withdraws, like taking the hand out of a glove, we can see this is exactly it. And then we need a state of non-return. I put it in this way, where we should try and get a one-way ticket, not a return ticket. But this is easily attainable, we are assured, by the person who is ever steadfast in their concentration, that is an ever steadfast yogi or spiritual practitioner, who constantly remembers me every day and thinks of none else. That is why I say, in answer to the question, I'm just echoing my own teacher, how many times should we say a mantra? Constantly, 24 hours of the day, we should be unconsciously repeating this. And when we come to a specific japa practice, we do it consciously. Anyway, having come to me, says Krishna, these great souls are no more subject to a return visit, rebirth, because rebirth is transitory, nothing's happening. It just goes on in repetition of the old mistakes and of the old patterns and the old sufferings and the abode of pain. For that reason, he says, for they have reached the highest perfection when they're released from that. But what happens if we miss the mark? Well, no effort is wasted, Krishna tells us. And so we progress. And the immortality is there always. Our nature is that. Because beyond this unmanifest, there's another unmanifest. Beyond this unmanifest, which is nature in its potentiality, is another unmanifest, which is eternally existent and doesn't perish, even when all other existences perish. And for this reason, this highest unmanifest is actually called the imperishable. The other unmanifest comes and goes. It's, in a sense, imperishable. It's a kind of temporary infinite, if you will. And it's said to be the ultimate goal, this imperishable. Those who attain this, they don't return. But what about other paths? Well, some depart never to return, and also the time in which they depart to return is delineated. We can leave that aside a little bit, but there is a certain timeliness about their so-called departure. And then others will go on a different pathway. And just for interest, we can know what these two paths are. That's okay, it's all good to know. But the yogi, the chapter finishes off with this. The yogi who knows this transcends the fruits of good deeds inherent in the study of scripture, sacrifices, austerities, study, and charity, and all the things which are good, and attains the supreme primeval abode. So when religions are looking as an ultimate post-mortem condition, if it's anything to do with reward, they've missed the understanding, because the goal is transcending that. The goal is our own freedom. During the years of unfoldment, there are many synonyms that occur to us in the depths of meditation about this word God. And we have to really know it cannot be known by the human mind. Any attempt to try and do this is just really of a limited value. I won't say completely no value. But if we are still, or if we listen and are still, in that stillness, this supreme imperishable will reveal itself. And it requires patience. Don't be anxious about it. Right where we are, God is. Right where we are, God is. And so there's nowhere to go. In the scriptural terms, the place on which I stand is holy ground. So there's nowhere to run, nowhere to go, nowhere to go after life. That's often the question asked last night to me. So after death, where do you go? Can you tell me this? Well, it's a conventional way of thinking. And then I have to try to convince a person, no, there's no coming or going. It seems like that, no doubt. To the ignorant, it will seem like that. So, dwelling on this, by the way, is a very powerful meditation. That God is here where I am, that the kingdom of heaven, who is within, or which is within, is here. It's within me, it's within you, it's within all. That I and the Father are one. This is not just applying to Jesus when he says it. It's not applying to Krishna when he says it in a different way. That there is only this one. Before anything I was, says Krishna, and Arjuna puzzles, because Arjuna is only thinking of Krishna as a friend who was born at a certain moment in time, not understanding the divine nature from which Krishna is standing. So in this meditation, we can realize that God is within our own being, and that I and the Father are one is a very powerful meditation, that God is in my individual being, God constitutes my being, God is the life, the soul of my being, the spirit, the substance of which my body is formed, the only law governing me, not laws of lack or limitation, not laws of food or climate or digestion, not laws of medical belief or theological belief, because what we call God is the only law. God's law is a law of immortality, eternal law, an eternal condition, if you will, and perfection. It is self-maintained, it is self-sustained. This is the teaching of all the great realized saints. They teach exactly the same. And so where we will look for God. God works, and the functionality of it. God works as bridge builders, coal miners, teachers, salesmen, lawyers, artists, ministers, housewives, students. Infinite intelligence at the center of our being, which determines our special form of expression. That's where you'll find it. So we find it in the depths of our meditation. We have sufficient scriptural material to act as a subject for it. And we'll discover an indissoluble union, which then transcends all of our reactions that are not in our favor, such as anger. Well, I think we can leave it there. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you so